Hello everybody, welcome to episode 19 of Shelf Review, where today we'll be going over book 5 of the Steel Ball Run, part 7 of JoJo's. So, this book was also a really good book. So, it starts off predominantly, well I guess I'll show you the covers first. So there you got Gyro, and you got Johnny back there. Then you have a beautiful rendition of Johnny with Diego's stand up there, and you got Tusk. Well, no, that's not Tusk. There's Tusk right there. So yeah, little W mans. But this book starts off with us going over the, continuation of the Darkmoor and Lucy Steele events. And so we see Darkmoor end up going against Johnny and Gyro because, well, that's too far in. Okay, so we see him looking for her, and eventually she ends up escaping via the help of Mountain Tim. Now we learn that she and Mountain Tim briefly came in contact, and she called him while she was in the building. He came to assist her, and then he told her to run and meet Johnny and Gyro since they have the same enemy. So she ends up running off and doing that, and Mountain Tim is ultimately killed by Darkmoor, and it was a pretty cool battle, but I mean nothing big. But yeah, so she runs off, meets Johnny and Gyro, and they meet up and like, who are you? And she's like, I'm Lucy Steele, and she reveals to him that she knows where the spine of the Holy Corpse is. So they're like, okay, we'll trust you, we'll go, but Darkmoor was able to follow her. Then, all of a sudden, we see a sudden change of position, Darkmoor. There's a brief fight. We see Gyro and Johnny fighting Darkmoor. They're struggling because Darkmoor is able to freeze the water because it's raining there. He's able to freeze the water in the air and like cut their skin and all that. But eventually Gyro learns that he can throw his steel balls and evaporate the water in the air via the spin. So this ends up happening, and then we just abruptly see a change in like location. I presume this is a stand of some sort, but it's not directly stated. So with that, we progress along, and eventually Darkmoor is defeated by the group, and then we see the finishing parts of stage 4. We see, actually, let me look, who won specifically? Okay, no. So after that, we see Gyro and Johnny progress along, and they end up catching up to Diego, and Diego is trying to win at all costs, and they reach a plane, and the plane has a specific line to which the horses can run and get to their location efficiently. And so, as it progresses along, Diego stays in this line, and we see Gyro have brief flashbacks to when Johnny was telling him that he just didn't have it in him to beat Diego, and we keep saying this. Diego's using his stand to kind of fight him off and all that, and then eventually, Gyro gets behind his horse perfectly. It's sudden. He's just suddenly there, and he's directly behind Diego. There ends up being a fight, and Diego is ultimately knocked off his horse. His horse is briefly crippled. It is, I believe it's a muscle strain or something like that. Yeah, so Diego is out of the running for now. He ends up placing like 54th in the fourth stage. Yeah, so in the fourth stage, we end up seeing, I believe his name was Noritoshi Higashikata, so the last name of Josuke, so that was actually kind of cool, and he's from Japan too, so I wonder if there's going to be any connection with that and Jojo Leon, once I eventually get over there. But yeah, so we have that, and I believe Poco Loco and Sandman were second and third or something like that, and Johnny and Gyro were after them. Yeah, so Gyro is still lagging behind. He hasn't won the amount of points he said, and he's still down on himself because he's like, hey, I didn't end up winning, and I can't. But Johnny's like, you did win in your task of beating Diego. So we progress along, and we eventually see kind of a flashback to when, right after they acquired the spine ends up going into Johnny. And we see as Gyro, Johnny, and Lucy kind of communicate and try to build a plan. So, ultimately, what Gyro ends up doing is he ends up giving Lucy the eye of the Holy Corpse so that she can get within the circle, because she's the only one of them that actually has access to the inner circle. Now, there are people suspecting her of being within cahoots with Johnny and them, but they don't know yet. And Darkmoor was the only one who ever actually figured it out, and he ended up dying. So, with that, she's given the eye, and she heads back to Kansas City after the end of the fourth stage and all that. And then we continue along to the fifth and sixth stage, kind of get a set out of what the fifth and sixth stage are going to do. We can see that Kansas City to Michigan Lake Lake Michigan is the course for stage 5. And so we move along, and we eventually see as Johnny and Gyro run into this, house, and they're just talking, yapping. They end up making a song, and Johnny goes to grab some tea, and it cuts him. And he sees a towel, and it's all shredded to pieces. So as they grow closer to this shed, or a shack, it obliterates things. And so eventually they see Dot Han, who is a Mongolian rider, coming up on them, and they believe that he is the stand user for the stand. And they end up, Gyro ends up throwing a steel ball at him, and it just disintegrates. So it's not been revealed yet, like what or whose stand this is, but it absolutely obliterates whatever. And but yeah, so they do this, and eventually they end up getting buried under the rubble. And Gyro believes that Johnny is about to die, but he ends up being able to dig a hole with part of his disintegrated steel ball for Johnny, and he ends up saving Johnny. And then I will briefly go back to a scene with Diego that was, because this has a connection to Diego. But Diego, after the race, he realizes that he cannot win with his horse at the moment. He has to wait till the 6th day to even be back in shape. So he ends up finding Funny Valentine, or at least an emissary of Funny Valentine, and is talking with him. He's like, hey, I'll make a deal with you. I'll get you all the corpse parts if you make me mayor of Manhattan. W deal, I guess. But yeah, so he agrees to find the holy corpse parts if he is allowed to become mayor of Manhattan, and if he obstructs Gyro and Johnny in their endeavors. So we see that, and then we see, and then going back to the Dot Han incident, we see Diego's stand, the dinosaurs running after them, but they have something weird on them. They have a sign, and how this sign is working is, as Gyro and Johnny figure out, is that these signs can lead, once coming in contact with a person, they lead to them experiencing a certain thing, like such as getting slashed up, getting disintegrated, or like even lighting their tongues on fire. So I'm kind of wondering if this is similar to Reverb in Part 4, since we have the Higashikata dude, and now this, I'm kind of thinking this part of the run will have a little bit more association with Part 4, because, I mean, it seems to act like Reverb, because Reverb, what he did was he would send a certain thing on a person, it would latch onto him and then cause him to do whatever that was. And so I'm kind of wondering if this is like Reverb. But then after that, we see Johnny kind of get down on himself, and we end up getting a flashback to when he was a child. And we learn in his childhood that he spent his time in England. And he had a brother named Nicholas, and he actually had connections with Diego Brando during this time, which is very close to what Jonathan had. And, well, Jonathan Joestar Part 1, this is Jonathan Joestar, but I'll just call him Johnny, because that's what he's predominantly called. But, yeah, so that progresses along, and we see that at one dinner, Johnny has something in his pocket, and his father's like, what do you have in your pocket? Show me what it is. And he shows him it's a little white mouse pet, and his father is mad because he told him to keep it in his cage. And so he's like, you gotta go drown it. So he goes to drown it, and he just can't do it. And Nicholas comes up to him, and he's like, hey, why don't you release the little mouse? Because he's called Danny, just like the dog in Part 1. But he's like, why don't you go release Danny into the woods, and I'll get a taxidermy for my class so that Dad never knows. So they end up doing that, and a couple of days, or I don't know if it's days, weeks, or months, whatever, it does not specify, but it's not a long time. And a couple time later, we see Nicholas just running around on his horse, showing that he's a phenomenal jockey. And then eventually his horse is running, and then it gets spooked, knocks him off, and he ends up dying. And it was eventually figured out that a white mouse was the one who ended up scaring this horse and leading to the death of Nicholas. And Johnny realizes that, hey, that was Danny. And so Johnny, what he does is he tries to strive in his brother's steps so he can fill his boots, because he always looked up to his brother and he loved him. And so he does that. He ends up winning his first Kentucky Derby, and his dad is like, you're still not enough, because Johnny was going to get some of Nicholas's boots because his boots were worn down, and his dad just gets on him, gets grinding him down, and eventually he pushes his dad, which causes his dad to break a window or something, and a shard of glass gets in his throat. So I don't know if he dies here, but I presume he did. And but yeah, he ends up dying, and then it moves along back into the area, of the Dot Han and Diego outrunning and all that, and whoever the other person's stand is. But, because Dot Han ends up getting obliterated by the other person's stand that isn't Diego's, like the combination stand. But, yeah. So they end up going back to the main time, and we see as Johnny's just realizing that he's a victim of fate, or coming to the conclusion that he's a victim of fate. He's like, as one thing goes right, another always has to go wrong. So, because, like, we look back to the instance where he got shot and all that, no one was around him. And they get to running, and eventually they get to the Mississippi River, and that's where their tongues get lit ablaze by the little dinosaurs, and they bury themselves in mud, so the dinosaurs can't physically get to them, but they can still get to them through the symbols. And with that, Gyro's like, he's getting on to Johnny for getting down on himself, and he's like, okay, the good time is ever to give you your fourth lesson on the spin. So I know that Tusk evolves, like I've learned that, so I'm honestly believing that in book 6 we will see Tusk Act 2, which I cannot wait because Reverb or Echoes is one of my favorite stands of all time, and it's because it's evolved, and Koichi is one of my favorite characters in all JoJo's, so I just really cannot wait to see how Tusk evolves too, because I'm just really hyped for it, because I love evolving stands because they're goated. But yeah, this book was really good. I would say book 4 was probably, personally, more of my favorite because I loved Ringo Rodigan and his backstory. So yeah, but yeah, really good book, really beautiful art. So yeah, that's all for episode 19 of Shelf Review. I thank you very much for watching, and see ya.